Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Food Dialogues Austin. We're streaming live right now. Thank you all for being here in the audience. We're thrilled to have you. We've got a great panel lined up for you this afternoon. Just real quick, of course, the Texas Farm Bureau is the host of today's event. I'm Randy Krutz with U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance. And just to tell you just a couple of things about our organization real quick, as I got asked earlier, we are made up of over 80 farm and ranch and ag organizations. It's a very unique alliance that's come together to talk to the consumer about food issues. This is, I think, number 15 of the Food Dialogue events that we've been involved in over the last 3 years, and we're very proud of these events, particularly proud because you bring together such different opinions, and we get to hear everybody speak and with the passion that they have in this afternoon relative to production practices and food. The organization also worked with James Mole, a documentarian, to produce the film Farmland, which we're very proud of. And if you haven't seen that, it will be coming to the digital side of our release. Will happen this fall, and we hope you all get a chance to see it. Let me just go ahead and kick things off. This afternoon, we're going to talk about farming methods and consumer interpretation of that. A panel of experts here is going to address the health and safety concerns related to the foods we eat and the technology used to grow them. But we look for some very spirited conversation, and all these folks have great passion for their opinions. We always want to be so polite and keep everything as professional as we possibly can through these conversations. We also want to invite the audience here to the mics and on social media out there in spaces, the hashtag FoodD, F-O-O-D-D, and you can also bring questions, and we'll bring your questions forward through that medium as well. So let me introduce real quick here Evan Smith. Evan Smith is this afternoon's moderator. He's co-founder and is currently the CEO and editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. He was formerly the editor-in-chief of Texas Monthly and was there in that position for 18 years. And Evan, thank you so much for being with us.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. Nice to see some of you back from this morning. We had a great talk today about animal welfare this morning with a really wonderful panel, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to lead this conversation this afternoon. Let me encourage you, as you heard earlier, that we're going to take questions from the audience during the 90 minutes. We waited a bit, I waited a bit into the conversation because we really were just sort of lost in our thoughts to start taking questions, both questions handed to us and questions particularly at the microphones in either aisle. We are happy to, and in fact encouraging all of you to make this happen, take questions earlier in the 90 minutes. Bring you into the conversation. If you have cards, write questions on them, pass them to the appropriate people. We will work them into the conversation earlier. Do not be shy. Shyness and modesty are overrated. Stand up at these microphones as soon as you're inclined, and please join into the conversation. You're going to make it much livelier if you're a part of it as well. As we had a great panel of 6 this morning, we have a great panel of 6 this afternoon. Let me briefly introduce them, and let's dive right in to our topics. On my immediate left is Glenn Four, who with his wife Paula owns Springdale Farm in East Austin. Some of you who live in the Austin area surely know about the great accomplishments of the Fours at Springdale Farm. Over the last 10 years, no, pardon me, I'm reading the wrong one. The 4.83-acre family-owned farm grows seasonal vegetable varieties in an organic setting. The farm is committed to growing produce for anybody in the area interested in eating fresh, local food. A couple of important terms that are going to come up over and over during our conversation in those last couple sentences. Prior to forming Springdale Farm in 2009, Glenn and Paula owned a landscaping and lawn maintenance company. On his left is Brent Batchelor, a county extension agent in Matagorda County who supports the county's beef production, which adds $23 million to its economy annually. He also works with the county's organic and conventional growers. On his left is Kurt Mowry, owner and partner in Mowry Farms in Brazoria County. Mowry Farms grows rice, corn, grain sorghum, and soybeans on over 2,500 acres in the Sandy Point, Rocheron area. He's past recipient of the American Soybean Association's Young Leader Award for Texas and was recognized as Rice Farmer of the Year by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. On his left is Eric Firm. Eric is a fourth-generation farmer from Ackerley. Over the last 10 years, he's transitioned thousands of acres away from synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and GMO crops including 250 acres of organic production. He's the author of 2 published books, Son of a Farmer, Child of the Earth, and Surviving Ourselves. On his left, Alan Lewis. Alan directs government affairs and food and agriculture policy for Natural Grocers, a 60-year-old health food store chain which operates 85 stores in 14 western and midwestern states. And I confirmed, indeed, the old Rooster Andrews location up in Hyde Park is one of how many in Austin? One of 3 in Austin. We'll take Temple as part of ours. That's fine. So 4 in the area. That's great. A national retail company that sells only foods and supplements with natural and organic ingredients. Finally, Dr. David Baltensperger. He's our Texas A&M panelist this time. We had one last time, Dr. Ron Gill. We're happy to have Dr. David Baltensperger, professor and Soil and Crop Sciences Department head at Texas A&M University. Provides leadership and administration for a comprehensive program of research, teaching, and extension. He came to Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension after working 17 years as a plant breeder at the University of Nebraska, where he developed and co-developed crops grown on more than 2 million acres. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists. It's a very male panel. I miss the Queen already, actually. I'm noticing that as we sit here. On the way over here this morning, literally, here is a release I get sent to me. I don't know if they knew that I was moderating this panel, from the Organic Consumers Association. I thought I would jump off with this. The Organic Consumers Association today launched a Factory Farm Free Friday pledge. This is sort of the reverse side of the Meatless Mondays that we've been hearing about here in Texas and elsewhere. Factory Farm Free Friday pledge, calling on consumers to boycott meat, eggs, and dairy from factory farms at least once a week on Fridays. A lot of people over here carrying the organic flag on this panel. Do we think such a boycott is a good thing or a bad thing? Mr. Mary, what do you say?
To each his own. I mean,
boy, you are a diplomat. We had some little diplomacy this morning. That was nicely said. What do you mean by that, though?
well, what I mean by that, if the side that wants to participate and to promote and to the organic side, that's fine, and they're well within their right to be able to do that. However, from a production agriculture side, like I do, I think it's kind of a frivolous type.
You're Mr. Conventional as far as this conversation goes, right?
I use conventional agriculture. I use as many of the newer technologies that I can incorporate in my farming operation.
Right.
And I can honestly say, from where I started back in the 70s farming to where I am now, I would never want to go back that direction.
Right, but the point is, you see that people who are kind of all organic, you say, God bless, you have your right to do that, to feel that way. We don't begrudge you what you want to do. If you want to boycott, go ahead, but the fact is, I'm going to do what I do, and that's it.
Absolutely. I mean, if they want to do that, there's plenty of room in the marketplace for them to be able to do it.
Right.
If they can do it profitably, that's their.
We have a bunch of people here who are quite organically focused. Mr. Ford, Mr. Lewis, to pick 2, Mr. Herm. Do you all support the idea? Are you so for the way that you do this that you want to tell the other side basically to blow off? Mr. Lewis?
I get those too. There's a new campaign every day. If there were 9 days in a week, you'd have 9 campaigns.
I would have 9 emails, is that right?
That's a membership
I'm going to hit
organization.
unsubscribe when I get home. How about that?
Ronnie Cummins is, self-appointed leader of a movement. He's trying to get people to pay attention.
Yeah, well, he did. Success today, at least.
Wait till you subscribe for a few months. It becomes harder.
Yeah.
Now, in all seriousness,
This is your side, though.
what's a factory farm?
Yeah.
And is there really that big a divergence between a large natural family-owned / organic poultry operation or egg operation or feeding lot compared to the image that somebody might want to present as a factory farm or a feedlot, as we saw here earlier in the day? I don't resent the example, but it needs to be kept in perspective, right? There is a movement. These are fervent people who really believe that change is afoot.
Yeah.
And getting consumer awareness up and have them talk about these issues is the real goal.
Is the goal is. Right. Mr. Ford and then Mr. Herm. Is this a false choice? The idea that we're posing all or nothing, organic, conventional, but that's it, one or the other, that's it.
Well, what we like to do is allow people to make their own choice when they're ready.
Right.
So it's from a school perspective to preach that they want all to do Meatless Monday or this
Factory Farm Free Friday
factory,
or whatever it is.
thank
Right?
you there. Is I don't know. I don't give it too much credence. It does create maybe some awareness, but
Yeah.
I'd rather people come to understanding the dynamics of the food
Yep.
situation and making their own decision. We just try to preach, healthy food,
Yep.
clean food, know where your food's coming from, and even better if you get to know the people that are growing your food, then you understand.
Well, we'll come to
what you're
local
putting in.
because I think local is definitely another conversation topic in this. Mr. Hurd, what do you think about this? What's your sense of whether this is a false choice?
I don't know about false choices, but I think everybody should have a choice, whether it's organic or conventional. And something like this, to me, what I would see as a positive is that it may shed some light on some of the practices that involve, especially in the chicken world.
Yep.
I think all animals should see sunlight every day.
That's you.
I'm a little old-fashioned that way,
Yeah.
but I don't want to eat those kind of eggs. I raise my own chickens. Do I think that what goes on in all these factory farms are right? No, but I don't know what goes on in all of it. Because somebody produces video from a handful of them, I'm not going to assume that goes on at all,
Right.
whether it's cruelty to the animals or just the practices in general. But the positive I can see from something like this, there needs to be some changes in poultry and these other factory farms, even the feedlots, where it's more about the health of the animal, because that impacts all of us whenever we consume whatever it is, the beef, chicken.
Right. Dr. Baltensberger and Mr. Batchelor, you're not really practitioners so much as you are theoreticians, commentators, experts in the whole world that we're talking about here.
I'd ask, just from a technological standpoint,
Yeah.
where you're getting your iPad 6 from. Is it coming from an individual backyard
Right.
operator in technology?
A grower.
Or is it coming from
Yeah.
a major enterprise? And just to label everything that's big as bad
Yeah.
is, in my mind, an irrational kind of a
Well,
of
in
a
the-
step.
In the
But,
realm of false choices, there's organic and conventional, there's big versus small. I wrote a whole bunch of these down here. There's local versus out of market. There's safety versus efficiency, as if it's all one or the other, right? There's mass versus class in some of the places that we choose as consumers to shop with them. I mean, the fact is, these terms, we really ought to understand our terms first. So, Mr. Batchelor, when we talk about organic and conventional for the benefit of people here, for the benefit of people online, let's see if we come to some agreement on what we actually mean by these terms.
Right.
What do you
And
think of when you think of organic
I
and
think
conventional?
that from the standpoint of that discussion point, that anything we can do to have consumers or society in general to educate themselves more about, in this case, food, is certainly a good thing. But to use it in that context where you're pitting one side against the other, I disagree with. But as far as, what is the definition of organic? I mean, we have a federal guidelines, USDA organic, that people can follow and get a little
Right.
green thing that says USDA organic.
Literal definition.
Right, and then we have a lot of other interpretation, but I mean, in reality, as an agricultural scientist, I know that any system we work with has carbon in it, so it's organic. I mean, from that standpoint. Now, we do introduce things in there that are derived from different processes,
Right.
but they're still basically organic components that go into those. So I think you could go back and forth on that, and it comes down to, what you're personally willing to accept or not accept as far as when it comes to our food, which we're real sensitive to, because most of us know that, that's the building blocks of ourselves, and particularly our next generation and the one after that, is that it's a very important topic that we all should be engaged in. But at the same time, there's a lot of ambiguity even within the word organic or conventional or whatever.
Anybody feel differently about the definition of organic? Mr. Lewis, this is a world in which you live. How would you define that?
You brought up the OCA. Let's remind everyone in the room, since we're ag focused and we live in an ag bubble.
Yeah.
I know people who I had to explain to them where milk comes from. Oh my God, it comes out of a cow. There's a huge consumer.
I hope that wasn't at the Hyde Park store.
No. Whole Foods. I didn't say that. But you're going to see this over and over. I guarantee you that a Tyson poultry farm with 500,000 birds in a barn who don't see the light of day and get grain fed and are alive for very few weeks before they're harvested, that's not what's on that farm's homepage. That's not what's on Tyson's homepage. That's not what's on the chicken package at the grocery. So we mock consumers for being confused and mock consumers for being ill-informed, but whose fault is that?
You think the producers are responsible for providing misinformation?
When's the last time you saw a real picture of a factory farm in any promotional materials?
No. Mr. Mowry, this is it's sort of like the organics are outnumbering you on this thing here. This isn't very fair.
No, it's a...
You look like you can take care of yourself, but nonetheless, I'm feeling
No.
sympathetic.
No, we hear this on a daily basis from the conventional side, and I hear it being termed as a factory farm, and I mean, if the definition of a factory farm is a father, a brother, my brother with his 2 sons, mine with my 1 son, out there on a 2,500 acre farm, working sun up from sundown, and so be it.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
You'll take that label.
I'll take that
That's what
label.
it is.
But that's a definition of a family farm. I mean, there's no outside employees from it.
Right.
We do that day in and day out. We are prideful in the product that we put out there, that we sell to the rice mills and to the other processors that buy the corn and the soybeans that go into the cattle market and to the poultry market. We do that with pride every day, and we feel like in most definitions, it's the consumer. The consumer has probably in most cases been 3-4 generations removed from a farm. It's never been on one, it's never seen one, has no idea except what it sees on the internet or what it sees from a 3-second blip from a picture shot on a news. And
So how do you, when you embrace, I asked you earlier, do you grow conventionally? And you said, yes, I embrace that. So when you think that you're a conventional grower, how do you define conventional? What does that mean?
Conventional can mean a lot of things. It can go, we do some conventional, we also do some minimum and do some no-till operations on our farm. We've introduced no-till into it because we feel it's a better program. It leaves a lot of the organic matter that's left over from the previous crop on top of the ground. It's allowed to deteriorate, be able to bring the organic matter up there. It also is cheaper in fuel costs. It also, with the genetics that we're getting in seed production now that we plant, it's also a better technique to be able to use. We also still use the old-fashioned way of conventionally doing things, which is with a tractor and a big tillage tool to go in there and break up the material that's up on top of the ground and start all over again. But that's not our preferred choice.
Right.
But I'm sure the organic crowd probably does to some extent the same thing. They probably use a lot of the organic matter that's still left there and not disturb the soil, which I think is the better way. We just tend to do it on a larger scale.
Mr. Herm, I'm listening to Mr. Mowry, and I'm thinking that am I going to hear much differently from you? Much different if I asked you how you operate?
Well, I get stones thrown at me from both groups as well because I'm not a small farmer. With my dad, we farm over 6,000 acres. So that's not a...
You're the problem.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the issues that I have. Like, somebody will watch Food Inc. or some other nice documentary, which I love them all, but then they'll think, well, if you have 100 acres or more, you're a bad guy, or, what is too big? And I also want people to understand the story of how farms got that big and why we're that big. It's because prices aren't near what they should be. And we could talk about the reasons for that all day and not agree, but
Well, we will.
62 cents a pound for cotton right now, when I got a $150,000 tractor out there and a $50,000 planter, they cost more than the 250 acres that I bought that is organic right now. I'm out there riding around this tractor one day, I'm like, this tractor and this planter costs more than this whole farm.
Right. So you're farming at that size out of necessity.
Yes, it takes so many acres just to make your payments, and some people say, well, why don't you just get one little
So you
tractor?
say 6,000 acres?
Yes.
Mr. Mowry, how big? Never
2,500.
supposed to ask somebody how many acres they have.
You're
I
not
know the
supposed
whole
to.
story.
You don't ask a girl their weight, you don't ask the size of the operation. But
Right.
that's
All right,
another debate.
how much do you weigh, Mr. Mowry? How about that? Can I cross the streams? What am I supposed to
Ask my wife, she'll tell you.
Right. You don't want to tell me? Okay. Mr. Lewis?
2,500
2,500. Mr. Lewis?
What size of my farm?
How much? When you work with folks, what's big, small? Tell me about your relationship to.
Wrong question if I can have it. I mean, when I talk to folks who
Yeah.
come to me and want to tell me what's what and who should be doing what and what's good and what's bad, I got one word for them. It's complex.
Yeah.
And I tell them, as soon
You
as
don't
you
lean
think
small, big. It doesn't matter.
as soon as you think you understand,
Yes.
you don't know enough, right? It's extraordinarily complex.
Right.
I'll defend everyone's work. I'll defend everyone's type of farming and their approach based on economic issues, soil issues, regional issues, price issues, right? But on the whole, there's really no organic versus conventional versus genetic engineering here on the panel. But on the whole, there's a desire among my customers to move the needle in a little bit of a direction towards supporting a family farm so that they can pay the mortgage, have health care, put a nest egg, put their kids through college, and retire, not be subsistence farmers.
You know, Evan, organic versus conventional or industrial or however you want to coin it. I mean, organic farmers, I think, tend to look at Mother Nature as their boss and try to mimic Mother Nature. And so we're continually adding compost at every planting. We use organic products like seaweed or molasses and things like that to feed. We get in tune and plant many crops over a course of a year so that we don't have buildup of one thing in the soil that may attack the next plant, so they get stronger, and then you got to bring stronger chemicals. So I think the line is, and I know we all do things differently, and maybe at this point in time there's still a need to that. I just would like to be kinder to the Mother Nature and use what she has given us and modify it naturally and organically. And I think that's a better consumable product because there's things that we know that we're not ingesting, and we're taking this in to feed our bodies. And so in the conventional agriculture, you know, they use nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, insecticide, miticide, fungicide, on.
All the sides.
Post-emergent, pre-emergent, yeah, and you get two sides with your entree. But you know, that's the difference right there. I think, in my opinion.
Mr. Batchelor and then Dr. Bolton.
Okay, I don't disagree with that, and if everybody could buy their food from him and assume that those practices were carried out, I would say that would be a good thing. But when you hear that definition of organic and know the reality of what goes on in other organic systems, I don't think that what he painted, the majority of the organic produce that has the USDA label on it that's sold at a grocery store, although they're following those rules, that would look like that. I would challenge that all of it
So
would
you
look
think that
like
maybe the organic food is not as pure as he's saying, and maybe
Well,
the
I'm not saying it's
conventional
not
food
pure,
is not
'cause
as impure as he's
I
saying.
don't have a problem with conventional produced or organic produced food. I mean, I make choices based on taste and price and availability and that.
Right.
But I would hate to have that definition of organic be everybody's perception that that's the way it is, because that's not always the case.
Dr. Bolton.
Well, I just wanted to follow up a little on the complexity issue and
Yes.
perhaps your question on the definition of organic. Organic is a legal definition and conventional is not. Organic is legally defined by certain practices
Right.
by the USDA.
Despite the fact that some people may embrace it without actually fitting
What-
into that pocket.
What we are painting
Yeah.
is everything else is conventional, and there are many different practices that are every bit as unique as organic
Yeah.
that are practiced in food production around the world.
An example. Give us an example.
He talked about no-till.
Right. No
We
toll.
talk about, we can talk about a system that only uses pesticides as a problem exists,
Right.
as opposed to prophylactically. So there's a lot of variations to what we're lumping into
But once you apply,
everything else.
excuse me, but once you apply a herbicide or whatever one time, it's still, the plant is going to take that up. So you can't be really organically, and I understand it's just a definition. And by the way, I'm not a certified organic farmer. You know, we try to preach, get to know your folks who are growing the food. But I mean, you couldn't be calling yourself an organic operation, in my opinion, if you.
I wasn't suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is that there is more variation in conventional. You painted that everybody puts it on here, 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 and here, and here. There are a lot of variations in what you're lumping into the conventional. And that's the whole process is that everything that's not organic is being called conventional. According to your operation is a conventional operation because it's not certified organic.
Well, that would be from the people that want to certify you, and that's, you know.
You think it's all about certification, not practice?
It's a collection of a check to make you a
sometimes,
certified
Mr. Mallory,
farmer.
and then we're going to go to the question.
But sometimes it's painted with a real broad paintbrush.
Right.
And that's not true. Some are organic, some that use no pesticides in their organic operation, but there are organic farms that use organic pesticides in there.
Did you recognize the way you approach your work in what Mr. Ford said? Mr. Mallory, did you recognize it?
What's that now?
Did you recognize yourself in what he said?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we don't, in our conventional operation that uses pesticides and those products in there, we don't go out there and just dump it on there on a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis. We're out in those fields every day.
Right.
We're scouting those fields every day to see, is there a weed pressure? Is there an insect pressure? Is there a disease pressure? If it needs it, yes, we will apply it. If it doesn't,
Not
we don't.
indiscriminately.
No, because it costs money. That
Right.
takes away from your profit. That's what a lot of people don't realize.
I want to come back to price and cost, and I want to come back to also, somebody mentioned genetic engineering. GMOs are obviously a big topic of conversation, but I want to take a question from here first.
Is this, oh, there you go.
I can repeat it if it's.
Hi, okay. Hi, I'm Susie Wilde. My husband Daniel and I are cotton farmers, not very far from Mr. Herm. And we raise GMO cotton. We have for a lot of years, and that has made our cotton farms insecticide-free for 8 years now, which we feel is a huge benefit.
Big advantage of
Huge,
GMO
huge.
root has been no
Yes,
insecticides.
where we're in an area where the worm pressure is extreme,
Right.
and you almost can't raise it without something.
Yeah.
And so we're about 500 acres, and we're considered very small cotton farmers. And this kind of went back to the question of what do you consider large, what do you consider small?
Right.
You know, this man's making a living on 4.5 acres.
Fewer than 5 acres.
And so, 500 acres, we're very small cotton farmers because the margin of profit is really, really small. And is there a definition of large and small based on crop? That's what I would like to see, is that there's more of a definition. Look at the crop instead of just, well, he has 4 acres, so he's a small farmer, we like that. We have 500 acres, you're a big factory farm, we don't like that.
Right.
But as far as a question, that's what I was posing, because we do have all sizes up here.
Size really is not really a way to be. You can't determine the impact of size just on the basis of numbers. It's not all about just numbers.
I mean, a good example would be my grandfather farmed 100 acres, and that was a sizable farm in the day. Now I have farmers that farm 10,000 acres in my county, but it would take 3 of them to equal probably one of the big organic farms in California, or in the Midwest. So it just depends. I think we generalize too much when we talk about these production systems in general and what is large and small and these other monikers that we introduce into the conversation.
Ms. Lilly just brought up the GMO question, which I would hope to bring in. We also have a question about that. Before we go to the question over here, let me take the temperature of the panel with regard to GMOs. I suspect I know the answers, but I'm not going to speak for the... Mr. Herm, let me ask you to go first. Where do you come down on this question of GMOs?
I've had a real interesting relationship with it because when I moved back in 2005, I thought that's where I wanted to go with our entire farming operation. I thought it was the future, faster, easier, get rid of insects, weeds, like that. And then as I started to explore what this was, with a pesticide and a herbicide gene instilled in each seed. What really does that mean in the broad scheme of things? And I did a lot of reading, a lot of studying, and for me, I just didn't feel like it was the right choice. I felt like there wasn't enough studies put into this in the long term for us to really just go out and plant 150 million acres of it, or 165, whatever it is in America at this point. You see a lot of countries that have banned it. In Europe, you got rumors such as Asia that within 2 to 4 years they may not let it within their borders.
Yep.
So if all these countries and all these different governments deem it as potentially fatal or harmful, and some studies that are starting to come out, maybe it's not such a good idea. Yeah, you can get across your acres faster. I think you can save some money in some areas, but in the long run, I felt like financially, environmentally, and just my own personal choice, it wasn't the right choice to make.
Dr. Baltensperger, is the risk as great as Mr. Herm suggests?
We haven't been able to identify evidence in many years of studies that there was a risk of negativity.
Yeah.
I was talking with the group at lunch that the largest cause of death in the world is malnutrition and undernourishment, and it's not here in Austin.
Yep.
We spend more on entertainment in our food dollar here in Austin than they do on their whole well-being in those countries where most of that death is occurring. But when it comes to those areas, being able to produce food efficiently and economically
Through whatever means.
with no evidence that these issues that ingesting something has caused any problems, that gets to be an issue because there are real problems that it's countering.
And
Mr. Ford.
just quickly, how many years research do we have on GMO not being a big problem?
Go ahead.
It was first introduced in,
Well, that was a question,
95,
yeah.
96, so.
That's commercially, but it was researched a lot longer
Yeah, it
before
was
that.
researched a lot longer before it came into my hands. As of today's, it's not I have not seen any credible or reliable peer review type report that's been brought out that shows any kind of detriment or any health issues going on with using GMOs. And to Eric's response about the countries and stuff like that, just I think several months ago, some Chinese nationals were arrested because they were out in fields, research fields of GMO crops out there in the Midwest, trying to pirate that technology to get it over to China. So it's not that they realize the importance and the significance of that technology. They're out there looking for
Just
it.
may not be sanctioned.
Absolutely. They
Right.
realize the benefit of it. They know that that's the direction it's going into because of the health benefits of it, being able to put what gene it needs in there to be able to produce a crop there.
So,
I
Mr. Herm,
want
yeah.
to I want to put the risk perspective into
Please.
place just a little bit, and not to pick on Apple entirely today.
Well, you've done it already,
But-
so just go ahead.
But I hear that there were a record number of cell phone 6s ordered today. We know that the number one cause of teenage death today is texting while you're driving. And yet they're saying we need many more years of research on GMO foods where there's just been nothing that has been observed or identified. And so I really think that the fear about GMOs is completely disproportionate to the reality.
Mr. Lewis.
Yeah, getting back to the question, I can't see the questioner, I
She's
apologize.
sitting back
but
over here, it's okay.
You most certainly are using pesticides.
Yes.
That's the BT in the cotton plant itself.
Yes, no, I didn't say that we were not using pesticides.
yeah.
We do use pesticides. We have not had to spray
Right.
insecticide, so we have not used any kind of insecticide for 8 years.
So I understand that, but, so I'm a big reader of the Ag News, and 2 years ago in Michigan, the farmers had been planting BT corn for 10 years, according to directions on the label, doing what they were supposed to do, had a big tall crop ready to harvest it, and there was a windstorm. 2 counties of corn blew down. No roots left, because the rootworms figured, well, if this BT is going to be here, we're just going to eat around it, right? And
Yes,
now
the
we have
resistance.
now we have plenty of worms up in that particular area. So there is a great promise, and maybe there are no dangers, but there's a reason that biotech companies started developing the kind of the knockout punch of Roundup with 2,4-D, and they're already developing 2,4-D plus dicamba. Is because it only takes 7 to 10 years. And I really hope you're successful, because your ability to farm those acres with GMO is fantastic. It's wonderful. But remember, 3 years ago in Texas, the cotton bugs got so bad on GMO cotton that the EPA had to approve fluoridone to somehow save that crop. And everyone said, well, fluoridone, there's no known dangers. Well, there's also no known studies.
So you think that there's no guarantees with any of this stuff? That's your point.
Well, I'm saying that, you start nudging Mother Nature in one way, it's going to come back the other way.
another way.
And everyone here is going to agree with that.
Right. Let me take
I want to just add, though, on that technology issue.
You gonna pick on Apple again?
That we had an iPhone 4 3 years ago. We had an iPhone 5 a year ago. We got an iPhone 6 or 8 or something today. If you're going to play in the world of technology and use modern techniques, and I'm sure that grocery chains are using modern technology to run their air conditioning and heating and cooling systems in their grocery stores, that there is a change. Technology gets replaced by other technology that's an improvement on it. It's not to say that it's perfect.
But can we afford to roll the dice with consumers?
What dice are we rolling? That's what I want to get to, is what dice are we rolling when you've got kids dying from cell phone texting?
Well, I think taking this from
nothing, and yet
food and
we have
texting.
nobody die from food issues.
It's a great talking point. It really is.
It is, but what we're going to go to is then GMO 2, GMO 3, GMO 4, because we don't know that, and that's why the research is needed to be done before we put it in people's mouths, promising them that it's the end all when it's not. We don't know that.
I don't think that's what they presented at Glenn. I mean, look at research done in cancer. I mean, they didn't stop at that. What they've developed on some of the medications, the chemo, radiation, the new cocktails that they're putting to remedy that and limit that or kill that cancer in that individual. What works on one may not work on the other, but it's the same. It's the same cancer though.
Well,
so it's a progression. I mean, things do not sit still in anything.
We have a very patient question right over there. Yes, sir. Sorry about that.
Couple of comments, and then I've got a question, and it's not really based on organic, but I think it applies. But first comment, there's suicide nets around that Apple factory that built those iPods for you, so it might not be the best example. And it's not true. In Texas, we fed cotton cake, cotton burrs. It was a cheap filler, had some protein in it. Standard practice. It was never to be fed to breeding classes of animals because it affected their fertility. It also makes the meat taste bad if it's fed to them while they're finishing. Well, that's not true with the GMO cotton now. When you concentrate that BT and you process it into cotton cake protein supplement, it is killing livestock in other countries. And the technology that has brought that to us here is funded by these major corporations that are researched by these land-grant universities, and whoever's paying the bills on the research is going to get the research they want. I mean, that's a definite. No-till drilling seems like a great idea because you're not cracking the soil, you're not releasing the carbon, but then you increase your pesticide and herbicide applications. And I will say what Joel Salatin says, organic is the government's work, and it means not a whole lot. Natural means nothing nowadays. So the question I want to ask you guys is, you'd commented on how much your equipment cost for that to produce what you do. There was a time they said in agriculture, get big or get out. And so everybody got big, and they took on debt. And they went from being a polycultured farm with hogs and cattle and chickens and multiple crops to monoculture. And ultimately become a commodity farmer. And at best, you're looking at break even. So what has that created by monoculturing?
Yep.
Not so much organic, but the GMO, and GMO is used as a weapon now. If it comes up in your crop and you didn't pay for it, Monsanto's going to try to take your land, and it's very well documented. There's documentaries you can watch.
So
and
let's
a lot
ask,
of-
you're
So-
directing this to Mr. Herm, right?
Yeah, well, no, all of them, just basically
Okay.
the
Let's
commodity
start-
farming and get bigger.
Let's start with
you know.
him about
Thank you.
the economics of this.
Well, I think it started, I think it was the late 60s when that slogan from the Secretary of Agriculture, get big or get out, plant fence row to fence row. If you look at agriculture, the history of it from, the Great Depression, the heyday of American agriculture was in the 19-teens. That's when farmers were getting every bit of parity. And if people don't know what parity is, that's what your crop is actually worth. And we're getting probably 50% of it in the cotton world. And I'm assuming it's pretty similar in most of the other commodities.
right.
But in the 70s, there was a lot of farmers were upset. The American agriculture movement was going on. I remember as a kid going to these tractorcades, my dad and these other guys going to nation's capital and tractors. Everybody was upset because they weren't getting close to parity. Well, they didn't realize how good they had it then because it was like 85 cents for cotton back in those days. And we would dip down as low as 52. But why are we there? There's lots of reasons why. Corporations, you got a handful of companies that run anything and everything from the seed to the finished product. Until it gets to the stores or somebody else's store. You got Monsanto's and DuPont's, they own the seed now. So it went from $120 a bag when they first brought it out to $350 for a 50-pound bag now. More money's going to that. So you got John Deere. You're down to basically two companies to buy all your equipment, your tractors. And so it went from a $25,000 tractor to a $125,000 tractor to now a $195,000 tractor. Harvesting equipment went from, we mounted a couple of things on our tractors and a basket on top to 8-row strippers because we've got to get it across it faster, and those things cost $200,000 now. And the next wave they say it's going to come out, it's going to cost $500,000. If that happens in our area, the only guys that are going to be farming are the guys that have plenty of oil wells to support it.
Yeah.
You can't buy a $500,000
So this idea that you can be a small farmer, relatively speaking, and not have to engage with that big agribusiness.
Even if you farm 500 acres, you got to have a good tractor. You got to have good equipment that's not going to break down, and
Right.
you got to have at least. If you don't have one thing to harvest, a cotton stripper or whatever to harvest your cotton, then
Evan,
you got to hire it out.
this is
Mr. Lewis.
the crux of the issue,
Yeah.
right? What we're describing here is an economic system where so few buyers are out there. It's really 6 big food conglomerates who are milling, processing pork, buying beef on any given day. And if you're going to sell to them, you have to strip out all your costs and produce it in the cheapest, most economical, most large scale
They really
way.
drive the conversation from a
Right.
terms
But-
standpoint, right?
Consumers barely have a choice to buy products outside of that system. 70% of the packaged products in your grocery store are provided, placed, produced, and put on the
by
shelf
the big
by
guys.
6 companies.
Mr. Batchelor, this is a consolidation and the kind of a conglomeration of all these industries. It's not just in the food business or the farming; it's in every business. This is kind of
Correct.
the way the
That's
world is.
whether it's politically driven or economically driven, you can't separate out agriculture and say that's the only place it's happening because it happens in,
Yeah.
every situation. But I wanted to, now I have 3, I got 3 fingers up, 3 things that I would like to go back to. One, on the GMOs, it was kind of alluded to that those plants are actually producing some type of chemical, but the insect resistance now is derived from Bacillus thuringiensis, BT. Well, that's one of the major things that is available for organic farmers in the spray on their crops in order to resist worms, Lepidoptera larvae. And they eat it and they die. It's a naturally occurring, now we synthesize it now, it's not all naturally occurring, but it's derived from a naturally occurring bacteria. Well, the only difference is, and it may be a big difference that you can't cross that cavern, is that now through the genetic manipulation, that plant produces that. So when the worm larvae eats on it, then they ingest it and they die.
Right.
And the other thing is that we talk about the herbicide situation. The plant doesn't actually produce the herbicide; it's just made resistant to it. And there's lots of discussion on whether we're using more or less herbicides. I know we're using less insecticides. And then the third thing is we always try to fool ourselves into thinking that we can outsmart Mother Nature or the environment or whatever. And it's going to constantly compensate for whatever we do. And I think we think ourselves as being pretty smart, but in reality, that system is going to compensate and overcome almost anything we do. And that's why we end up with weed resistance and insect resistance and that. So
Mr. Ford, before I go back to Mr. Herm, so to the point that Mr. Badsler just made, do you have a problem with naturally occurring pesticides or herbicides?
Well, I just think it's not, like the commercial. It's not nice to fool Mother Nature,
Right.
And that's how I strongly feel. Take with what you have and work with the soil and modify it organically, composting, and there's not a need to put any herbicides or things out there, insecticides. I will say, you mentioned that spraying herbicides or whatever is necessary, or organic compounds like BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, or for worms, and that is a problem with, once again, the organic labeling. And so it's very important to know, I think, say, who's growing that food, because you're going to spray something once, or you're going to spray it. If they say you can spray it 4 times in a season, does that mean you got to have a big problem? You might need to spray it 8 times that year, and so that's not a ethical farmer, and I think that's what we face in maybe both sides of the coin. So I think we've got a long way to go with organic and how we term and label these things.
Mr. Herman, then the question right here.
The chemical companies have had a real huge stranglehold on agriculture since World War I. And there's a lot of purpose, misinformation, I guess I should put it that way. Talk about pesticides, like the bollworm is the main thing we struggle with in cotton. Well, a bollworm, I studied this guy, Philip Callahan. He'd written this book called Exploring the Spectrum. The bollworm does not have a pancreas, so it cannot digest sugars. So we went from spending $30 an acre on pesticides in 2005. I spent $2.50 the following year applying half a gallon of molasses with water, killed every bollworm out there.
Oh, is that right?
Did not kill our beneficials, because when you start spraying with pesticides, you kill every insect out there.
Did you get that molasses from Monsanto?
They shipped it directly? No.
Who was the provider? Right, exactly. Aha!
No, I don't believe they have a...
Let me take the question, then I want to ask Mr. Lewis something about something he said earlier about the big 6 or however many it is in the consolidation.
Sure, I'd like to bring the conversation back to consumers. And when
Sure.
we're talking about agricultural production for food, I think it's really important to kind of consider how we're framing the conversation. When we're talking about something that's pure, not something like technology. And I think that the fact that consumers are so confused, it's understood because we're comparing...
Confused about what?
Well, the fact that we're comparing food to Apple products is not helping the situation.
Do you think consumers have adequate information about what they're putting in their bodies?
I do not, and I think one of the reasons I would really advocate for GM labeling, because I think what people need is a greater understanding of where their food comes from and the technologies used to grow it.
Anybody have a problem with more transparent labeling of food? Mr. Lewis?
Dr. David does.
Well, all I said was that voluntary labeling and supply chain labeling is wonderful.
Voluntary.
Yes, that if you want to pay for the label, it's fine. To treat it as that it's bad.
But if you don't,
when there is no evidence that it's bad, I think.
But if there's no evidence that there's no harm, then presumably, right?
Most of our labels are there for protection from something that's wrong. The federal labeling process is there to protect you from something that's wrong, not to assure that it's right. And so when you have those labeling processes, you imply something.
Mr. Lewis, what do you say about that?
Well, let's step back a second. I'm okay. The biotech lobby, which sounds like a bogeyman, but the biotech lobby wants to talk about GMO as being safe, but that's framing genetic engineering as a health safety issue, that something's wrong with that soy, that corn, once you eat it. I think time will tell. We heard the same arguments with lead, asbestos, Agent Orange, all of these things, right? You avoid scientific certainty by picking and choosing your research. Now, in regards to labeling and back to genetic engineering, the reason I would like to see it labeled on behalf of my customers is that the glyphosate involved is accumulating in the soil, it's ending up in the food to the point where government regulators are raising the amount that's allowed because there's so much there. If they didn't raise the limits,
Shelves would be empty. Or close.
It's in the rain.
Closer.
right? And what really troubles our customers and me is using glyphosate as a desiccant on sunflowers and wheat and barley, because that's one step before processing. So
Yeah.
much of that glyphosate ends up on the food.
So you would be for more labeling.
Yeah, to say the least.
Say the least.
But it's complex.
Because
Because there are so many chemicals implied in so many ways. Because genetically engineered sugar beets from Colorado end up having not a speck of protein in them. It's sucrose by the time it's processed. So where's the health issue there? Well, talk to the farmers that I know up there that are really having other related issues with the use of glyphosate
Yeah.
on their farms.
would you have a problem, Mr. Mowry, with more labeling?
I would. I think it depends on how that is being done. But initially, right now, to your regard to labeling, where do we start at? I mean, these crops have already been genetically changed or re-engineered back since we started planting. A corn plant doesn't look anything like it did back when it was originally a corn plant. So do you start then? A watermelon that you eat now, it was about this small. And it was covered. It was more seed than flesh in it. So do we start back then and say, this plant has been, this watermelon has a label on it that says it's been genetically modified?
That's a different technology, though.
No.
Because you're splicing species or things together from different species to get GMOs.
The difference that is being done is the technology that was being utilized at that time was out in the field. Right. Now we're able to, we have mapped the plants. We know what that DNA is. We can take what part of that plant we want out of it.
But we don't know what it does when we change it.
That's not true because it's been.
I would like to go back to the Apple discussion real quick about the age of information, the age of information.
Look what you
Well,
did.
you've got an iPhone in our back pocket. Why can't we look up and find out what's in something we buy at the store? What is wrong with giving the consumer, with this technology in our back pocket, the right to look it up and say, I don't want to buy a GMO because I just don't believe in it. I think as Americans, we have the right. We're like dragging the bus here. We're like the tail. We're the last country.
Mr. Mowry and Dr. Baldesberger don't necessarily think that's the right thing to do or that it's necessary. There are some people who would say that we got to nutrition labeling on foods.
Absolutely.
Largely because there was an outcry. People said, we just want to have access to the information. We'd like to know more and then make a conscious choice on the basis of more knowledge.
The USDA doesn't say there has to be a safety imperative to label. They specifically say over and over, if the consumer wants to know,
information,
good enough for
knowledge.
me. And the federal courts say if the government is compelling a labeling, it does not have to be a safety issue to be a free speech issue.
Mr. Herm?
Why are we giving so much power to a company like Monsanto? I mean, where us as farmers, we used to be able to take our own seed, catch it, and plant it for several years in a row. Why is it now 90% of our entire industry feels good about paying these guys so much money, and they increase it every year, and then they assure us that there's nothing wrong with it, but then they make you sign this little piece of paper, but oh, by the way, your stewardship agreement, if something does go wrong, you're to blame.
Right.
I mean, nothing's going to go wrong, but just in case it does, it's all your fault.
The risk is on you.
Yeah.
Sir, right there, standing up to the microphone. Sir.
Well, I'm a farm producer, and I plant corn and cotton DT.
Yes.
And have great success with it. In fact, across the nation, over 90% of our corn, our cotton, our canola are all now GMO products. And with that being produced in the United States, why would it not be easier if you want to label something to label the non-GMO crops?
So label the non-GMO products.
The non-GMO crops.
Right. It's kind of an interesting twist, isn't it?
Some of that assumption is made because if you know about USDA organic rules, it can't be any GMOs in that. So that's an assurance that there's no GMOs in that food. Now other foods, now there's some classes of food that don't have GMOs in them just because they're not available or they're not in existence. But from the, and I'm going to cross the street here on labeling, because I said at the beginning that I think consumers should educate themselves and have the best resources available when they make decisions. And we probably should and do categorize food differently than we do all these other consumer products that we're talking about. So because it's closer to us, it's something that we know we have to have. You know, besides water and air, it's probably the most important thing that we have to do. Whether we do a good job of what we put in our bodies is strictly up to us or how much. But the more I feel like information-wise that a consumer can have, the better off they are. But a good example where that didn't really play very well was the push for country of origin labeling for meat products. So now if you go in the grocery store, you're going to look on there and it's going to tell you which country that meat came from. How many of you know that or care? I mean, some people do. It's a big deal, but
My customers loved it. As a business, we hated it.
right.
Why
but
do you hate it as a bit? Well,
'Cause it's
logistically,
complicated.
yeah,
And we get the
logistically, it's been a
inspectors,
nightmare.
And we get the fines for someone else's
for
mess.
somebody else's trouble.
That's what I was gonna say, the biggest problem with labeling is gonna be from the processing side.
Right.
He's gonna have to have a different plant to establish that, to be able to process that non-GMO crop in there. What happens if he, on his non-GMO plant, somebody inadvertently sends one truckload of GMO product in there? If it gets out in the pipeline or it's discovered, he's gonna get fined. Well, it was an innocent mistake, but yet it happened. So there's gonna be a cost factor into that if you wanna do that. Is it gonna be 10 cents? Is it gonna be 20 cents? Are you gonna be willing to pay for it or ready to pay for it?
Let me ask another question we have here from Twitter about, GMOs are obviously an outgrowth, although you say, Mr. Mowry, not incorrectly, we've had GMOs in some form or fashion for a long time. It's kind of a modern world type deal. I asked a panelist this morning, Ms. Ross and others, about how technology had changed the business. How has the easier and theoretically cheaper access to technology, don't mention phones again, technology in all of your operations changed this conversation about organic versus conventional and the trade-offs and the benefits and the drawbacks? How, Mr. Herm, has technology changed the way you do business?
Well, we're able to get across our acres faster.
Yep.
We're able to save a lot of fuel with the GPS. The oil boom is making it difficult for us to keep a steady workforce. So
Well, that's interesting.
now with the computers on the tractor, we can train a guy in a few days, whereas before, it would take you years to train somebody if they didn't grow up doing it or...
So you have workforce issues.
Oh, yeah.
You're competing for the same labor pool.
Of course.
Right. Mr. Lewis?
Well, I'd like to point out that, organic's not stuck in the 1800s. This state-of-the-art gene stacking technology, and that's par for the course right now. The developing organic varieties that do all the things that you need them to do is part of it, is part of what we do. Mm-hmm. At the global level, Food and Agriculture Organization operates a global consortium for non-GMO seed variety development. They'll develop a seed that's perfect for a valley in terms of the climate, the people, the desire for particular food, and that's all open source. Technology is not just the domain of genetic engineering where you're taking the genes from one species to another.
Right. Mr. Four, on your fewer than 5 acres, how has technology impacted what you do?
I probably don't have we seldom get lost on our 5 acres.
Right.
Although,
One advantage to being small, right?
Yeah. My wife may think I need a GPS from time to time, but technology on a small urban farm is not as probably as impacting as it is for these guys, other than having that instrument again in your pocket where you might get an order or something like that. But it's not as impacting, I would, from my point of view, as it would be for the guys that have a larger operation.
Yeah, the technology it is unbelievable how it has changed the dynamics of farming. I mean, what Glenn talked about and what Eric has talked about as far as the GPS technology, we're now able to map those fields. We know which area of the fields are the better producing part of the field, If it's better producing, it doesn't need as much fertility to it. So now
Yep.
we can go in there, soil sample that field,
Be
buy
a lot more
acre.
strategic, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Because it costs when you put an extra pound of N out there, or potassium, or phosphorus, it costs money to put that out
Adds
there.
up over time, right?
We don't flippantly put that out there. I don't want to spend $1 unless I can get 2 or 5 back. I won't be in business if I just trade dollar for dollar. It's too expensive. A combine is over $400,000 and more right now. A cotton picker is over $700,000. You can't make those mistakes and combat the weather, the markets. I know by being able, the big conglomerates were able to know what production was going on in other parts of the world. I didn't have access to that 70 years ago, but now I know almost as much as what they do. I don't have access to the customers because they're the ones that are selling globally, not me. But I can access that information. I can sell my crop. I some years have 2-3 crops sold before it even.
Right.
I've even bought the inputs.
So,
because I can
both,
make money.
both on the production end and on the selling end, technology
Absolutely.
is your friend.
It is even the playing field.
Patient gentleman up here at the microphone.
Thank you. Well, my name is Mark Gale, and I'm confused. So,
That was our job.
okay, I'm on the board of directors of a small urban farm, and I work for the biggest of big agriculture. So I think I know a little bit about the subject matter. But I guess my question for the panel is, and Evan, you alluded to it before, is, are consumers confused? I think the purpose of this food dialogue project is to help consumers get closer to food and understand it. But, this is excellent debate. How are we going to help consumers understand, make decisions, whether it's GMO or not?
Yep.
So, how can we help consumers with the conundrum of what to eat? Because as evidence here, it's really complicated.
Yep.
And I don't know that, to you, people don't know. They have no idea, and they're trying to figure it out.
Well, let's take the premise of the question first and toss that back to everybody. Are you all obligated, are we all obligated to provide consumers with more clarity? Dr. Baltusberg.
I think so. I think one of the places where I have a concern with the labeling is, and it goes back to your previous question, all GMOs are not created equal.
Yep.
GMOs that we have talked today and have been alluded to are largely the Roundup gene, which is inserting an activity, the Bt gene, which is inserting an activity. But we've developed through our modern technology a much better understanding of microbe, fungi, and insect interaction with the plants. And many of those plants, many of those diseases and insects, when they approach a plant, elicit a response from that plant.
Yep.
That allows them to reproduce on that plant and grow and attack it. We have now identified a way to block that response from the plant so that the plant doesn't respond to the insect and disease, so they don't grow and develop on it. And that's a whole advancement in the technology relative, because we aren't adding another chemical.
Right.
We aren't putting something in that's not been there. And yet it's still under the GMO broad spectrum. And some of the big advantages.
How do you solve the problem of giving people better information so that they're not confused?
Continual education.
Continual
And we have to get better at it.
Yes, buy Eric's books. That's exactly right.
I think we need to be getting into the school systems and
Early.
And I'm not just talking about where they grow one plant, for a week or two. I think there need to be gardening projects within the school system. I mean, if you wait till you're 20 or 30 or 40, hey, it's great, you got started. But if we can get into school systems in elementary schools and junior highs, there's farm-to-table programs, there's farm-to-cafeteria programs out there where you get to know your local farmers and you can get local food, but the kids can also grow the food from seeds themselves. And they'll have a more intimate relationship with it, and they'll want to eat those foods that they grow. It's amazing. I got two boys.
More food literacy.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
Mr. Mary, Mr. Bachelor,
I'm going to give a personal experience.
Sure.
My daughter was probably, my oldest daughter, I'll pin her down a little bit if she watches this later. I guess when she was probably in the 2nd or 3rd grade, we were at McDonald's eating a Happy Meal and everything like that. And I asked her, I said,
Not organic.
Not organic, but it does. That does not matter. I asked her. I said, "Where did those French fries come from?" And she looked at me and said, "Well, they came from McDonald's." No, I mean somebody actually had to put the seed in the ground to grow the potato to be able to do that. And it hit home with me. I said, we've got to do a better job of educating the consumer out there, because I'll be very blunt, and I don't mean to be hateful about this, but the consumer is not very smart. I mean, it looks on the internet, it takes that bite, it eats it, and it feels it's gospel. It's the truth. And in a lot of cases, that's not true.
That's assuming that the consumer even looks on the internet to begin with.
Right. I mean, whether it's a 30-second blip on the 6 o'clock news.
Right.
We have to do that. We try to do that.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, trying to bring a group of school kids to a commercial farm like mine, it is a nightmare. I mean, it's an accident looking for a place to happen. You can't do that.
Yeah.
We've got to figure out ways to be able to educate these kids.
In the schools.
In the schools.
Well, I agree, but I'll disagree a little bit, because in your situation out of town, maybe, and so my little situation is an urban farm. I've got a school right behind me where 60, 75 kids can walk right across the street without boarding a bus and come to the farm and see, like you're saying, hey, those potatoes, hopefully mine won't be McDonald's French fries, but I mean, those things are going to be,
But they have no idea
they can pull those things.
They came out of the ground,
They can
and
see
that's-
where their egg comes from. I mean, so it's a disconnect of two generations since the 50s, when we all started having, mom went to work, and it kind of hit then. But so the kids have missed the experience of growing up on a farm, and so I think at least in the urban farm environment, that's our advantage, because I can't grow 2,500 acres of anything, but I can plant a seed, no pun intended, in a lot of kids' heads, in a lot of people's heads, because they can come out and see the farm. They're not going to drive 45 miles out. They'll come 2 miles out, and so I mean, as you said, it all starts with education, and we need to hit the schools.
And I do that. I go to kids' schools, and I take some of my GMO corn that I have in my grain bin, take it to them, get some styrofoam cups, put some potting soil in there, let them play in that potting soil, let them put that seed in there, and they watch it grow, and they think that's so neat, because they didn't realize it could do that.
Magic.
It's magic to them, and it has to be done. We realize.
Mr. Batchelor, don't hate on people in Matagorda County, but tell us, are
we
they smart enough to
No,
understand some of these issues?
It's because it is so complex. There's a lot of information out there, and you can pick and choose what you have. And it is responsibility of all of us involved with food production, whether it's a retailer or a producer or a manufacturer or whatever, to allow consumers to make their choices. And I think the education is important. I mean, we do local. We get all the fourth graders in Matagorda County, which is not a lot, but they come through our educational program every year. We spend 2 days, and they look at how rice is produced and how corn and cotton is produced and beef cattle, and we talk to them about the soil and the land and all that. And I do think there was a disconnect. I mean, I grew up in the 70s, but we lived on the farm, so everything we ate basically came from the farm, except the wheat products and sugar that we couldn't produce. But but my friends in school were eating TV dinners, and my mom's like, "Man, I'm not feeding you that stuff. That's bad." And it is. I mean, 1970 TV dinner was not a good thing for anybody. But I think as we move forward and as a society, we've reconnected with food, and now we don't know how to deal with that. I mean, we're seeing things we don't want to see, and we're hearing things we don't want to hear.
In some ways, it's too much knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's information overload. It may not be too much knowledge, but it's information overload.
Sir.
Hi, I'm glad that we got on the topic of education, because I'm an educator and also a chef, and we've got a lot of young people here today, and I appreciate you talking about all the things you're trying to do and everything that y'all do to raise food. But one of the questions that came up was about labor. How do you get young people inspired about going into your industry and being the next generation of ranchers and farmers with all of these challenges out here? And how are we going to feed our country and maybe the world as well without people out there on the farm actually doing it and ranching? And a lot of these people, including myself, second, third generation from a ranch or a farm, that knowledge base is being drained, and some of the data out there showing that elderly population is, we're losing ranchers and farmers every year. So how would you, as a panel, discuss that with young people at the high school and college level to inspire them to want to do what you guys do?
We talked about this morning some, that the change in population in the state from rural to urban is we're losing a lot of people in places where you may have had people in this industry naturally before. And I thought Mr. Herm's point about the energy business taking a lot of the available workforce away is really interesting because, the shale boom in the state of Texas has had a very positive impact on a lot of areas of life here, but it may have had an inadvertent negative impact on ag.
Sure,
right?
But I mean, there's lots of ways we can just getting involved. There needs to be more people involved, and when the baby boomer generation exits stage right here over the next decade or so, we're going to have a huge void to fill in agriculture. And to me, the issue is not going to be we need to be farming more acres. I don't want to farm 6,000 acres. When my dad retires, I'm not going to farm that many acres. I want to farm less because it drives me crazy. I mean, there's 4 months out of the year I don't know my middle name. But if we have more farms, whether it's in town or out, I think we need more smaller farms. I really do. Whether it's growing fruits and vegetables or raising goats, whatever. But there needs to be diversity in every single area, and you can't have 1,000 people growing sugar beets. And you can't have 1,000 people here growing apricots. There needs to be diversity, and I think that farms need to get smaller, and they will.
Mr. Lewis.
I spent some time this week with Texas young farmers, Coalition Alliance organization, I'm not sure, but really great resources in there, exactly aligned with what you're trying to do. They also have some fascinating maps. I'll just give you one geographic map. Just one example is that large farms are increasing. Medium-sized farms in the last 10 years tend to be dissipating overall, but the small farms are actually showing some growth as well. I'd highly recommend that resource.
Yeah. Can I ask you about population in another sense? So on the one hand, we see rural shifting to urban. The other thing about Texas these days is that we are growing at an extraordinarily fast rate as a state. More than 1,000 people a day added to the state's population. And the population is not only growing, but the composition of the population is changing. We'll soon be Latino majority. The state's, the Rio Grande Valley is growing very quickly. Places we've underinvested historically in a lot of infrastructure and all that. There's going to be a different state here pretty soon. Does the change in the population in Texas in any of the ways that I've described or other ways I haven't described impact your thinking about the longevity of the work that you do, Mr. Mowry? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
It could possibly change some of the dynamics of what your crop rotation could be. You might, in a Latino diet, rice is a very focal point. I know up here in the Austin area with the water issues and such that are going on, water is a very important part to us in the rice production.
And water, as a resource, water is being strained by growth?
Absolutely.
Right?
It's more competition out there. There's more people that demand and need that water. That's where we look at in the future that the GMO part, there might be some technology that would be able to make that plant, instead of needing so much water, would be able to use less water.
Right.
And there's being work done on that as we speak right now. So there's a lot of different dynamics going on with the population shift and what it could do for crop production.
Mr. Ford, you live in a city that is also growing itself quite quickly, 150 people a day coming to Austin. Is there going to be room for a 5-acre farm in this city, or are they going to put up a high-rise and buy you out?
They may. I hope not, but I think there's a need for a lot of little farms. I mean, like the European model. You know, every community, and this is where we came from, every community had a farm. Every community, you knew your farmer, you knew your butcher, you knew the guy at the grocery store. And so that's kind of why we're here as an urban farm, is to make people
personalize the experience,
think about what they're doing. And so, yeah, if we had that opportunity to get more small farms, then there's your interaction with the children.
Yeah.
And then there's that way to combat the disconnect of two generations, not even knowing where an egg's coming from. And so if we can do that, I think we can work together and try to make this a better thing. I mean, a small farm, I can't feed everybody,
right?
But we can feed a lot of people.
You can't solve the problems of the world on 4.8 acres.
So,
right. And I agree with that what I'm seeing is more small, diversified farms from people that weren't involved in farming or a couple of generations away.
Yeah.
But then you have the bigger issue of what Dr. Bosenberg was talking about of the world population and that big picture of where we're going there. So I do see a divergence of
Yeah.
the commodity produced products, good, bad, or ugly. Those farms are going to continue to get bigger and push more resources over more acres because of the expense and everything involved in that. But I do think that the resurgence of small farms, and
Yep.
somebody mentioned salads, and I've been to his place twice. I love his model, but I disagree that we could scale that model to the point to feed everybody. Maybe I'm wrong. I think we could feed a lot more people that way if we put more energy into thinking that way and doing that. And I agree that that's something we need to be working on. But as of right now, the big picture says that, to me, that we can't feed the world in what we're doing, and we can't continue to bring people into Texas with the limited amount of water and limited amount of resources to say, yeah, it's all good. I mean,
let me come at this maybe another way. So two other aspects of the modern world that I want to ask you about as it relates to the work that you do. Mark Bittman of the New York Times, the reporter and cookbook author, food journalist, was just in town last week, and he's a big advocate for a plant-based diet. He's moved his thinking in the direction of that. Diets have changed in this country. Not everybody's diets and not entirely in the same way, but we're definitely seeing a shift away from the traditional ways in which Americans eat to something that may frankly be more akin to the kind of stuff that you all do. Are shifting diets impacting in any way how you run your business? Mr. Herman.
Well, we're extremely limited what we can grow where I live because we're all dry land, no irrigation. So we have 4 or 5 crops we can grow.
Got what you got. That's it. Yeah.
And so we're not going to be impacted as much as most farming areas. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it needs to go back to more diversity.
Yep.
And one thing that our industry has been pony whipped into is being monocultured, whether it's the crop insurance programs or anything has always been set up to cater to that one crop that you do well in your area.
Right.
And I would like to see where farmers are more rewarded, and where we'd like to grow something like black-eyed peas because they do well, they're heat resistant.
Yep.
There's 2 companies that control black-eyed peas, and farmers have a long-standing tradition of getting hosed by those 2 companies.
That's a term of science.
Yes.
Right. Mr. Mowry, did changing diets in this country, or the possibility of changing diets impact you?
I see that impacting more of the fresh produce market more than anything. The basic staple commodities like corn, rice, soybeans, those are used in feed ingredients as well as the rice is used for human consumption there as well as other things, but it's going to be mainly in the fresh produce market and stuff like that. And just what's going on out in California, people don't realize how they say, well, the drought's happening over there, we're having a little bit here, but that's impacting them more than they realize because that's the big part of your fresh produce market.
Right. Well, let's see what the grocer has to say about this.
So, absolutely, but I'm going to put a spin on this.
Yeah.
We just collect hundreds of thousands of sick people, whether it's gluten sensitivity, chemical sensitivity, allergies, or autoimmune. This is what's driving food purchases in our stores, is the avoidance of.
That's interesting.
And give them a list.
Yeah.
And, whether we want it labeled for business reasons or political reasons or whatever, the consumers want to avoid certain things, and you can't avoid them unless you label them from seed all the way down to your macaroni and cheese.
But the part 2 of this, though, is when I grew up, and when all of us of a comparable generation grew up, our options in terms of supermarkets very, very different than today.
Right.
Yeah.
Here I live in Austin, Texas, which may be the most competitive high-end supermarket market in the whole country. Probably not, but here in Austin we have an inflated view of ourselves. So I'm just going to assert that. But the fact is, you got Whole Foods and you got Central Market, you got Trader Joe's, you got your stores, you got Sprouts, you've got even the H-E-B and the Randalls, what you would think of as the very mainstream mass-focused supermarkets, have robust organic sections now.
And the co-ops and the CSAs.
The co-ops and the CSA. So really, these are sort of salad days. Pardon the pun. It's not that bad. Come on. For the high-end supermarket. So I think that actually, from a consumer standpoint, we've never had more options. And I wonder how that's impacting this sort of conversation. Mr. Batchelor and then Mr. Mowry.
That's a good example. He brought up the gluten-free deal. We grow rice, or we did till we don't get any water. But calls I get, because they know I live in a rice production area, from manufacturers and that looking for rice flour have increased over the last few years because of the gluten deal, whether that's a medically induced or a choice or whatever.
Yeah.
Mass hysteria.
And on the labeling
Mass
deal,
hysteria.
that's a good example of where labeling was driven by consumers because of the need to fill that need. Because, you know, if I need to go in there and find something that's gluten-free, now I can find it because it says gluten-free.
Right there, gluten-free.
Now,
There's whole aisles worth of food that
if
say
consumers would demand the fact that they want to know if it's got a GMO in it or not,
Right, to
then
your point.
you could certainly get that done one person at a time. And I'm, you know, not against that, because obviously there, whether it's a choice or a medical condition or whatever. Same way with food allergies. I mean, peanut allergies were non-existent, I guess, when I was a kid, or we weren't aware of them, maybe because those people died. But now you pick up and I didn't mean that to be funny, I'm just saying that's just part of it. But now you pick up any product that's manufactured, what does it say on there? It either says it's nut-free, or it says it was produced in a factory that had nuts in it or whatever.
And so you think that's kind of a grassroots
Yeah.
deal, and that maybe some of the issues that we're talking about is unresolved, maybe they get resolved by
Right.
the public being similarly activated.
Otherwise, we cry to the government that none of us really wants to be oppressive and say, well, you should do it. And that's how we got our organic standards that nobody really likes, and that's how we got all these other things. My word for it is the government protecting us from ourselves, and I think we should be better about making our own decisions and deciding where we want those things to be rather than depending on somebody else.
Is the government in this, to your point about the government protecting us, is the government, for all of you up on this panel, a help or a hindrance when it
Yes.
comes to these things? The answer is yes.
Yes,
Both.
that's right.
Yeah. But you're not one or the other.
One of the big issues with government is that anytime they involve themselves in it, it becomes big
They can't help it.
because they want to pass a rule that
Right.
fits everything,
And it's not one size fits all.
and one size doesn't fit all.
Right.
And so that's part of what drives us to big, is government.
Last question from the microphone, then we'll have a last
I
question.
just
for the-
wanted to ask, if we were talking about gluten, gluten's labeling, and we saw it today on the lunch table, for those of you that went through the lunch, is a health indication, or at least perceived to be a health indication. That's the reason for that labeling, am I correct? Versus GMOs, which is not a health indication, there isn't a health issue.
It's not a direct,
Right.
it wasn't fair for me to put those
Okay.
both in the same thing, because it's two different things. But it is a good example of, and I mean, depending on what science you look at and what you read, gluten-free is a choice, or is it a medical thing? I mean, that's still out there, but obviously that was a response from the industry to say, okay, this is what you want, this is what you're gonna get. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying.
I
from a
think
consumer
gluten
standpoint.
intolerance definitely can come from, and it's, you know, a genetic, you do a genetic test and they
Right.
tell you that you have a gluten intolerance. So as
Right.
far as gluten-free being hokey pokey,
No.
I mean, maybe some people can get that conclusion and.
Celiac's not
but,
hokey pokey
no.
for sure.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, I'll speak. I mean, hell, my daughter has a gluten intolerance,
Mine too.
and I do too. And so when you don't know you're getting it and it gets you, it's a huge problem.
We have time literally for one more question, and I'll ask everybody to weigh in on this. So roll ahead 5 years. We come back here at the Farm Bureau's request in 5 years, and we're having the same panel discussion on organic, conventional farming methods and all that. What is likely to be the hot topic of conversation rolling ahead 5 years? Where, if you could look into the future, we'll go down the panel this way, Dr. Baltusberger and with Mr. Ford. What are we likely to be talking about in 5 years?
I think the future is still wide open on how we move
Yeah.
forward in the food industry and the food world.
Yeah.
You know, everything from the proportion of food we eat at a restaurant to the proportion of food that we import,
Yep.
that those issues are not going to go away in 5 years.
So maybe a
And
similar conversation.
so, one of the things that hit me today was that there was a lot of talk about how things had changed
Yeah.
in terms of the margin for farming and those kinds of things. But farming's been a subsistence business over the eons.
In a lot of ways, things are not that different.
And so when you look at meeting our human needs of food and fiber and shelter,
Yeah.
we're still going to be talking about
Right.
how we best do that. And a part of what drives our conversation right now is that we have a greater availability and a greater excess than what we can. I mean, that's what drives our obesity.
Right.
Isn't a shortage.
Mr. Lewis, what do you think in 5 years when we talk about?
Why didn't we learn our lesson about the persistence and long-term accumulated dangers of DDT? Now we've got to clean up glyphosate from millions, hundreds of millions of
That's
acres
the next frontier
in our country.
Right. Okay. Mr. Herm?
I think 2,4-D. I mean, as the Roundup is wearing off and not working on some weeds, and the push now with dicamba coming out next year with Monsanto and Dow's the year after with the 2,4-D, I think we'll be talking about that and its ramifications on human and environmental.
Mr. Mowry?
I disagree wholeheartedly with what Alan said about the glyphosate and DDT. My father went through the DDT phase of it. I remember him coming coated with DDT, and he's still alive today. So you need to get past that, folks. You also need to get past this glyphosate right here. On average, that's about how much glyphosate is put out on a field a year.
So what would you say 5 years
That's
from now?
it.
Now we know what you don't like. Tell us what you
What
do
I
like
would tell
5
you right now is the same thing I would tell you 5 years from now.
Yeah.
You can go out and you can feel confident in that grocery store that no matter what product, whether it's in a can or it's in a fresh produce, like a ear of sweet corn, you can feel confident that when you bite into that after you've cooked it, it's the best thing you've put in your mouth. I do it every year when I grow sweet corn on my place. I don't take it in there, I don't wash it off. You know why I don't have to wash it off? Because it doesn't have any pesticide on it. And I can eat that thing. I eat it raw out in that field. I take it home. I feed it to my kids. I eat it once a week.
Yeah.
I'm confident in it. I can do that now. I can do it
And
5
you'll
years
be that in
from
5
now.
years. You're making me
Absolutely.
hungry. Okay. All right. Mr. Massey,
What
5
I-
years out.
What I see, just my observation from a scientific standpoint and the research that's going forward, I think we're actually going to see, maybe not 5 years, but sometimes in the future, these topics are going to come back together. And I think that science and the management of soil and plant life and animal life will look a lot different because we'll know so much more about it.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be more in tune with what he likes to call about being in tune with nature versus trying to force our will on nature. So that's my prediction.
Mr. Ford.
Well, I think 5 years from now, we're going to have an even more educated consumer that's going to be demanding even more from our producers, that they're screaming for healthy, clean food. I'm confident that the consumers in this country will continue to rally, because I think it's important to future generations as we feed our children to make sure we know without a doubt what we're putting in them, what kind of food are they consuming.
All right. We're going to call this to an end. Very nice to have an opportunity to spend time with our very smart and passionate panelists. Please give them a hand. Thank you all for coming.